The Magnificat for me is the foundational marching orders for the prophet. And I think it's the things that Mary's insights that I think that helps us to understand what does it mean for us to preach in a way that is that connects our theology. So because so many times people think that the prophetic is something like, well, it's just because you're so connected with the cares and the pains of the people versus um, and they'll say something to the effect of like, well, we need to be more, we need to nevertheless um, remain rooted in our convictions. We can't be swayed by the do-gooders of this world. And I think Mary kind of eliminates that. You read through the Magnificat, and it's this beautiful passage. And if I may just kind of like go through reading some of it so that listeners can kind of have a context. But she begins by saying, my soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior, for he has looked with favor on his lowly servant. God chooses Mary. That's what I think that first part is. And then she continues, from this day, all generations will call me blessed. The Almighty has done great things for me. Holy is his name. He has mercy on those who fear him in every generation. He has shown the strength of his arm. He has scattered the proud in their conceit. He has cast down the mighty from their thrones and has lifted up the lowly. And he has filled the hungry with good things. And the rich he has sent away empty. He has come to the help of his servant Israel, for he has remembered his promise of mercy, the promise he made to our fathers, to Abraham and his children forever. And in doing this, what she is doing is calling upon the history of the people of Israel. So she's like this connecting point between the Old and the New Testament. I think she gets God's eternity. I think she gets God's work in history right here to say this is a God of continuity. This God who preaches and is for the lowly and talks about being for the poor and strikes down the proud. Um, she's saying this is the same God that is now to come, that is now I am expecting in my womb. So that is a powerful statement of continuity. Think about how incredible that is. That she's describing all of these things of just of a God who will, but who has been. He has shown his strength. He has cast down the mighty. He has lifted up the lowly. So she speaks in expectation of the Messiah in past tense, right? While looking back at what God has done. In other words, for Mary, she grasps that Jesus is not an afterthought in response to, but rather that God has always been doing this, and Jesus is the culmination of it all. And she says that more profoundly and clearly than anybody else that I know. Jesus didn't come out of nowhere. The incarnation is at the heart of God. I know there are so many ways in which this is, I think, really goes against so much of bad theology that says because of certain things that God had to come and rescue. But rather, the incarnation is at the heart of God. This is who God is, and this is what God does. And this is so important because, as I said before, so much of our theology is based on this theology of disjunctions between this, well, God was concerned about justice, and he was a God of wrath, and he was a God of all of these things in the Old Testament. And as I said, there's a lot of dismissive attitudes toward the words of the Old Testament prophets for some, because they say, well, Jesus came bearing a different message than them. Mary says this is a continuity. So that's one of the most powerful things, that this is, she gets God's work in history, she gets God's work in eternity, um, powerfully in ways that I don't know if anybody else says it as as well. The second thing that I would also say is that I think she gets God's incarnation better than pretty much anybody else. Um, the reason why I say this, and this was actually taught to me more recently, and I think this is missed so much by the fact that we have mainly so often male preachers, and we don't get this, and we don't get to we don't hear, we don't understand the incarnation in this way. But our mutual friend, Sandy Richter, she actually explained this to me, that one time she was preaching on the Magnificat on during Advent, and while she was pregnant, and and I think this is such an obvious source of insight and connection that many of us uh, fail to recognize because we've only heard men preach. And I think that's such a great loss to the church, right? And Sandy explained that as she was feeling all of these changes in her body, as she was experiencing massive morning sickness during the time that she had to preach this message, it reminded her that Mary wasn't just thinking about these things as some sort of a theological reflection, but her pondering was holistic because it was literally happening in her body. So, in other words, Mary was holding together the mystery of this great promise of God and the brokenness of the world literally in her body, in her fragile earthen body. She was holding the divinity of the incarnation. So, in Mary's body, the universe was coming together, and this is what she was understanding in its fragility and its brokenness, as well as the great mystery of the promise of fulfillment. And this is the glory that she is talking about. All of this in a way that foreshadows how Jesus will be holding all of these things together in his body, right? That's the incarnation, that God can and does redeem all of creation. And this is the promise that God has made to our forefathers. And this was the promise that God will make lasting forever. So listen, the prophetic work is nothing less than that.